Good evening. I'm Nico Opper. I'm a Bay Area filmmaker and a former JFI filmmaker in residence here, and your host for Take Action Day. So I have a little bit of a personal story to share for this particular film. 18 years ago, I had the great fortune of walking into Judith Helfand's documentary filmmaking class at NYU, and she's been a mentor and a treasured friend ever since. You're a brilliant storyteller and an equally brilliant educator, and I'm going to just say more great things about you for a little bit, and then we'll really start the panel. Congratulations on this incredible, important, and timely film. If there is one, yes. If there's one thing I've learned from you over the years, it's the power of documentary to advance social justice and have a meaningful impact on the world. You put your films to work, affecting change, and Cooked is no exception. You've also put yourself in your films before. Your voice and point of view and sense of humor has been a guide. You made the impact of corporate greed and big pharma and the impact of toxic chemical exposure from one generation to the next visible and palpable in A Healthy Baby Girl. Then you took it to the next level and helped us to see how toxic chemical exposure connects us across class and race in Blue Vinyl. You took us with you in your grief after your mom died with Love and Stuff.
The short.
The short, the future forthcoming. So my question for you is, who are you in this film? What is your role?
Well, when I started this, I wasn't going to be in it because a good friend of mine said, you can't be in every movie that you make. You just can't. You just have to learn how to do one where you're not in it. And it's true, I do. So this was the one that I started out doing that with. And when we shot almost all of the heat wave material, I wasn't in it. And then Katrina happened, which, I make that part of the process transparent in there. And I realized, this is not a one-off moment. This is a national paradigm. This is more than a trend. This is this very horrible thing that has sort of become baked into, literally and figuratively, baked into our society and our nation. And we, white people, for the most part, only take notice of it when we have to. And for many of us, we only have to because of the advent of the climate crisis and climate change, and it forces us to have to look at it because things are so horrible. And there's so much damage, and there's so much disaster. So we have to look at it then. So why am I in this movie? Well, I decided that I had to make a whole bunch of different kinds of connections, that we had to sort of go deep inside the world of disaster preparedness. None of the people that I was talking to that were part of one part of the story were necessarily going into the world of disaster preparedness. It's like if I could have found a character who was trying to make all of those connections, and perhaps I could have, maybe I would have followed them, but I couldn't. And I was sort of pushing everybody to make all those connections that I wanted them to make, and it was somewhat unnatural. Like Steve Whitman would be like, no, this is not a disaster. This is the long-term impact of systemic racism. I'm not going to talk about disaster preparedness. That's not and I don't think that's what's going to fix this. And, Linda Ray Murray hated my frame. But I think my frame, I think the frame is useful and important for a lot of reasons. And I think it could open some things up. So who am I in this movie? I'm a white middle-class Jewish girl from New York who is asking hard, sometimes very naive questions. I think that so many of us have gotten to a point where we sort of self-censor ourselves, so we stop asking questions of things that look absolutely horrible. So we don't say, wow, was this a tornado? Was this an earthquake and then no one came back to fix it? Oh, this is the long-term impact of redlining? Or is it, this is just how it is. This is the other side of town. I don't come here much until I feel like it's safe, or I'm invited, or there's a good brunch place, or there's a reason for me to go, or I'm going to make a movie and I go and I have a mission. So my job is to kind of take people like me to the other side of town and make it safe enough to ask kind of naive questions. Yeah. So that's my job. And so I think, people say it all the time. It's like, look, yeah, we know there's a problem, but you all need to know that there's a problem, and you need to want to fix it, and you need to know that this is your problem too. And the beneficiaries of this problem, which is systemic racism, is very useful to some of us. It has been. We have to speak out. So this was my offering.
Thank you. On that note, I would like to invite up our esteemed panelists. We have Daniel Holmesy, the director of the Neighborhood Empowerment Network for the City Administrator's Office of the City and County of San Francisco, a fourth-generation San Franciscan who has a degree in political science from San Francisco State University. Mr. Holmesy has spent the last 25 years as a communications professional in both the private and public sector. Mr. Holmesy joined the city in 2004. We also have Felicia Thibodeau. Felicia is the executive director of IT Bookman Community Center. She's been serving the public for over 25 years and coordinates Resilient Bayview, Empowering Communities Program Hub, which facilitates meetings and trainings to improve community resiliency in Bayview and Hunters Point. And finally, we have Bijan Karimi, acting deputy director at the city's Department of Emergency Management, responsible for overseeing emergency operations, policy implementation, hazard and threat analysis, training and exercise development, and planning for San Francisco. Let's give them a warm welcome. So for everybody here, I'd love to start with the question, just tell us about the work you're doing now around climate change and community resilience, and if you could also speak to why this film is significant for San Francisco.
You want to start, or?
Mary Ellen Carroll, our director, she has been with the controller's office, she's been with the health department, she has been all over the city. And one of the things that she has said to us, having been in each of these areas, is how important climate adaptation and how that integrates into emergency management is for us. And so as we look at plans in your city, as we look at ways that we can adapt, it's not just, and we saw some of the FEMA responsibilities, that's after something has happened. How can we start now working with the planning department, working with Department of the Environment, the health department, identify some of these other systemic issues that may have an exacerbated disaster, and that's something that we're starting to integrate into a lot of our planning. I grew up in Southern California. We went through the 2 different earthquakes there. My family, my father's a psychologist working at the VA helping veterans. My sister is a social worker for people that are incarcerated, and I'm constantly talking to them about how they prepare and what they would do with the communities they work for. And this is such a significant event to be brought up, so I appreciate the film.
Good morning, afternoon, sorry, evening even. I wanted to say, there is climate control? There's a climate issue? There is. I do this work because, quite frankly, I am a survivor of the 1985 earthquake here in San Francisco, Loma Prieta. I lost my grandmother due to Hurricane Katrina. She washed away with the floods and never returned. And I am born and raised in a community here in San Francisco, Bayview, which is the hottest part of the city, generally when we have heat. So through the experiences of surviving disasters, knowing that mitigating the response, preparedness, are the keys. And then looking at the systemic racism, looking at the economics, looking at communities, how they are, not how you wish them to be, is how you find the answers for recovery and response. And I am so absolutely, I usually fall asleep every movie that I watched. And I haven't seen a movie since E.T. because I fall asleep on movies that I stayed awoke and watched this movie. I think I only nod one time. It had me on the edge of my seat because you were speaking directly to the passion that lies within me about telling the story of the aftermath, but how the aftermath was the before math before we even got started. So,
Yeah.
thank you.
And Daniel Holmesy. I want to join my colleague and just tell you what an extraordinary film that was. You sent it to us before, but I kind of wanted to see it in a room full of people, you know? And it just was a fantastic journey for me personally because it connects with like my life experience and my personal experience. So I'm fourth generation San Franciscan. I was born and raised 6 blocks away from this building. Harvey Milk was a personal family friend of mine. And I tragically had a front row seat for one of the biggest disasters that ever hit San Francisco outside of 1906, and that was the AIDS epidemic. And many of the things that you elevate regarding society and our lack of empathy and our intolerance and our genuine sort of desire to insulate ourselves from the reality of what's happening to other people, I really think also should be captured in the conversation about the AIDS crisis in San Francisco. I remember going to sleep at night and hearing the riots in the Castro and people desperately fighting to protect their friends in a city that frankly said they cared, but did they care? And I just wanted to honor your work, but also connect it back to this neighborhood because for me personally, growing up managing gay nightclubs and literally having coworkers on Friday look fine and on Monday be dead from pneumonia was a similar type of thing where there was this level of tolerance for intolerance, you know, and I just want to elevate, that's what my message I took away from your movie, so I just want to thank you for that. For me personally, again, I grew up in a city where I thought everybody had the same opportunities as me, a little, you know, white kid from Noe Valley that went to some decent schools and had a positive outlook on life because we were the best city in the world because we were San Francisco. And it wasn't until I got a job working for a young man who one day would become governor, and that's Gavin Newsom, that I actually got in a car and drove all over San Francisco and for the first time found neighborhoods like the Bayview and Hunters Point and Kiska and Viz Valley and saw firsthand that not everybody in San Francisco gets up with the same opportunities that we do north of Cesar Chavez, then called Army Street for the old San Franciscans here in San Francisco. And I had a calling. And I decided I wanted to get in government, and I wanted to do something to make sure that every neighborhood and every child had the same opportunities. And so I got drawn into the civil servants and ironically began to respond to flooding in the Mission and other neighborhoods, and then got sent to Katrina, to the 9th Ward, and met a young woman there named LaToya Cantrell, I believe a sister to Felicia, who was fighting to rebuild her neighborhood after Hurricane Katrina hit. And just quickly partnered with Harvard, and a ton of amazing stories and best practices came from that. But the one thing I want everyone to understand about natural disasters is that all disasters do is accelerate what's already in place. So whatever trends are in place happening in your community are gonna move forward, good and bad, right? And the stories about New Orleans and Katrina were not only an indictment of the federal government, they're an indictment of everybody here. We were being spoon-fed images of people that were trying to get supplies from a Walgreens. If the person was white, they were a survivor trying to help their family. If they were a person of color, they were a looter. And we all bought into that. And so when I came back from San Francisco, the last thing I wanted to say is I want to honor Mayor Ed Lee, who's no longer with us. But he stood there with me in the 9th Ward and said, Daniel, this was not a natural disaster. This was a social justice disaster. Not a single person had to die in the 9th Ward. When you tell people on the last weekend of the month that they have to self-evacuate to get out of harm's way, and you know it's the poorest neighborhood in the poorest city in America where seniors are literally scraping the bottom of their top ramen package to stay alive, and you expect them to rent a car and get out of harm's way, then what happened was not an accident, it was inevitable. And I just want to put out here that it's just an honor to be on the stage with these folks right here, but I just also want to recognize that your work is really important. I think every American should see it.
But we are going to talk about the heat emergency plan here and what they're doing, which is so radical. Okay, just want to make sure.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about heat, but we could talk about a myriad of other shocks that have the same impacts on the same people. So heat is just one of the many things, but if we don't look at it at the fundamental like you have, we'll always have the same outcomes. So that's just why we want to really look at it from an all hazards approach, and I yield to my colleagues to share
Yeah,
more
I thought
about
we
that.
could kind of kick that off with Felicia. Felicia, you're from Bayview, and you're a huge leader and coordinator there. So can you tell us a little bit about your work in the community?
Yes, I've been working to build networks and stakeholders and hubs, getting the nonprofits and the small businesses and the faith-based and the organizations together as community stakeholders, keeping...
Put it nice up.
Yes. Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. Working in Bayview to build stakeholderships through the organizations and the nonprofits, the faith-based community, as well as the small businesses, to keep emergency preparedness, as you so eloquently put it, at the forefront. Because earthquakes and things are, over 20 years, people get complacent and the issues become very far removed until we either have one shaking and one rattle, one roll, then everybody's like, uh-oh, what are we gonna do? And in the 20 and 25 years, our city still is not prepared because our communities are not prepared. The disasters have played out across the state over and over again, and we see that when we put the investment in community for preparedness or coming up with plans, that's what works. We've had the opportunity in Bayview to activate for a heat relief center because Bayview gets typically 20, 25 degrees higher than every part of the city, and it stays hot all day. We get the sun 8 o'clock in the morning, and we still have the sun sometimes at 8 o'clock in the evening. So when we get the 100-degree weathers, we're cooking out there. And then you can come right into the Western Addition or the OMI and be freezing and need fog and umbrellas and everything, and there's mist. And in Bayview, they're panting like a overheated dog, literally. The people, not even the pets. And so building stakeholdership where we can train the residents of Bayview on how to identify heat stress and heat stroke just from an eyesight, knowing the difference of when you're balmy or if you're exhibiting sweat, so that the community can either call 911 because they think that the individual is in heat stroke, or that they cool them off and get, ice pack, cold water, sit down, drink some room temperature water. Small things that community can do to keep us safe. But the biggest part is those who are vulnerable and who's with access and functional needs, making sure that someone's going to check on them before we have the mass casualties. So we're working to build hub member investment through the organization, who in turn train and alert and give information to their constituents who they serve, so that we can get the message out.
And we have San Francisco is really in a tragically horrible paradigm. And I want to honor the work that you elevate there, because you did point out the fact that when you look at Chicago, which is a really flat footprint, weather happens everywhere kind of mode. But in 2017, we had a heat wave where it was 116 degrees in the Bayview. At the same time, it was 72 degrees in Seacliff. So, our topography creates microclimates, which to some extent, in the end, can be ultimately lethal. But the one thing about San Francisco that I think all of us should recognize is that we're a city that's aging quickly. We have 134,000 seniors and people with access and functional needs in the city right now. In 20 years, we'll be at 250,000 people. The reality is that we built a city for the climate of 1950. So how many people in this room, for example, have air conditioning in your home? Show of hands, right? So the truth is that in San Francisco, as a native San Franciscan, when it got hot, you just opened up a window in the back of the house and a window in your kitchen, and it cooled off, right? Because Carl came and the fog came in. But the truth is that That's no longer the case. And so the problem is in San Francisco, a heat wave is actually at 85 degrees, right? And most cities laugh at us, like 85 degrees, that's called sunrise, right? So 85 degrees, that's when we get into the danger zone. San Franciscans, we are not acclimated to heat. So when it does get to 85 degrees, we experience health impacts much sooner than most people would from other areas. On top of all that, our built environment has almost no cooling capacity, right? And so the truth is that when the sun comes up on San Francisco, the reality is that it doesn't matter how much money you have in the bank or how much your house is worth. If you have a southern-facing home in the city, you literally are at risk from the coast almost to the shoreline. And that's what happened to my aunt. My aunt in 1999 died in a heat wave in Miraloma Park, one of these little residential bucolic neighborhoods that's up on the hill. And it's foggy 364 days of the year up there. But on this one 3-day period, she began to superheat. And the thing is that when they talk about seniors don't cool very well because their capillary systems have shut down, so they don't sweat. So all of a sudden, the indicators for them disappear, right? The problem is, as you superheat, your cognitive ability begins to fail, and you start making bad decisions. So my aunt, rather than go downstairs and do her basement rumpus room, which was actually subterranean, decided to take a nap in her bedroom, the hottest room of the house. And she laid there for 3 days, dead. And the fog had come back in, her windows were open, the drapes had blown out the window. And for 3 days, her neighbors drove by the house and saw the windows with the drapes blowing out, and none of them stopped to check on her, right? Until my father went over at 3 in the morning and found her, right? After she hadn't answered the phone for a few days. And so this is a neighborhood that right now, really, the home's worth $3 million. And yet, we have dozens and dozens of seniors that are aging in place with no air conditioning and the same issues. The last layer for all of us is gentrification. So I can't tell you how many of my classmates don't live in San Francisco anymore. Like, the whole generation moved out and left all their parents behind. So whenever I have a reunion, high school or elementary school, and my classmates know what I do, the first thing they say is, will you check on my parents because I live in Connecticut? How many of you in this room right now know people that raised families in San Francisco and now live in the city alone because their children doesn't live here anymore, right? I mean, it's a tragic paradigm that we're all dealing with. And so the reason why that's important is because those embedded social networks are the ones that keep people alive in heat waves, right? And so I just want to put that out there that we have a really more complicated lens because this is actually a challenge for every community in San Francisco right now, regardless of your race and socioeconomic status on some level. Certainly the Bayview tragically has a much tougher a hand of cards to play with, but we're seeing people literally dying in place across the city, and the only consistent quality they have in common is they never called for help. And no one ever checked on them. Yes.
One of the themes you have in your movie is about the sudden disaster versus something that is more longer term. The World Economic Forum talks about that we are sleepwalking into a disaster, which is climate change, climate adaptation. They rate it as number 2 on their top risks. And when it comes to how we, as a community, and how we plan for these types of disasters, we need to reframe kind of what we're planning for and what we're doing, and how. For the immediate response, you can have a vehicle that you roll out. People can come in the sirens, but that's not this type of disaster. What Daniel's working on, what Felicia's working on, what you showed your mom doing during Hurricane Katrina of knocking on the doors of the neighbors, that is the behavior that we want to get the community to embrace. In San Francisco, we have such a high turnover of individuals. You know, Daniel mentions he's a 5th-generation San Franciscan. Far few people are like that now. They're here for only a few years, and then they move. And their friends are on their electronic device, not on the next-door neighbor. So they don't realize what it looks like when they haven't checked on a neighbor. They may not even know their neighbor's name, when it's that type of community cohesion that's needed to help when we have these types of disasters.
Well, that actually brings me to a question about local leadership, because it's my understanding that there are a lot of people coming in and making policy who don't actually live here. So can you speak a little bit about the challenge of that?
I think with anyone, it's appreciating the challenge that we had. And again, Daniel and Felicia, because they've been here so long, they have that history. And history is, I think, what drives the nuance of policy development. It's one thing to see it on a piece of paper and to look at some statistics, and it's very different to see, well, San Francisco, the average temperature is 70 degrees. Sure, but that's averaging what Felicia's seeing in the Bayview versus what's happening somewhere else. NOAA has one maintained and reported weather site in San Francisco. We don't look at that. We look at crowdsourced information that gives us temperatures all over the city using Weather Underground. And it's that type of real-time information that we need policy members to see and appreciate of how different all the microclimates that we have are and what impact that has on policy development. 85 degrees, that is our threshold. That's what the Department of Public Health now uses to establish when we're going to start doing more communication with the public. Something that's been flashing behind here is signing up for the public notification system. We want to make sure that the public knows, here's something that's coming and here's what you can do about it. There are local cooling centers or places where you can go, and that's a lot of the work that Felicia and Daniel are working on to make sure that it's not just having the public. This was one of the things that one of the police personnel that Mayor Daley talked about. How come people aren't going to the police station? Because many people may not like law enforcement, or it's different than where they go normally. So we need to have cooling centers, cooling facilities where people go, not where we want them to come to.
Amen.
I wanted to speak to that, and just having cooling centers mean nothing if your community do not know that there's a cooling center. So we've activated a cooling center and did all the great things and brought in all the great partners, but we had not informed our community beforehand of resources and places to go to get cool. So we sat in the cool room very proud of ourselves and served 0 people. So I go to the strategy of informing the community, engaging the community on the disasters that are to come. So our strategy is we prepare, in January, February, and March to inform our community about heat waves. But what I learned there is when you're in the winter, you can't walk over people who are freezing in the winter to tell them about the cooling center that's gonna be in September. So we come from an extreme weather approach to build neighborhood resource centers that will activate in extreme weather and get that message out that you can go to the local Y or to the senior center or to the recreation room to find shelter to get cool and to get warm. Because it's no fun when you're a community engager saying, I want to tell you about the extreme heat, and people are saying it's 40 degrees and 10 people have already died, because actually more people die in cold weather, I don't mean Chicago, than they did in San Francisco in the heat. They freeze on the streets and stuff, but we know because San Francisco doesn't have air conditioning in its infrastructure, so we come from an all-hazard approach. I come from a community that was plagued with gun violence, so I used to tell Daniel, I can't go to mothers who have lost their children to talk about the earthquake that may come when the earthquake has already happened in their home.
And I do want to be clear that the way our system works, it is a bottom-up planning process. So we come in, we find most communities want to get prepared for disasters, but what they want is not for the city to walk in and say, this is your plan, you need to implement it, this is your role. And G.L. Hodge, who's not here today, but he was the first leader for Resilient Bayview, he says the only reason why we work with Daniel is the only one who ever walked in with a blank piece of paper and a bunch of questions. And what we just finished an analysis across the city, we say, what are the top shocks you're concerned about? And what are the top stressors you're concerned about? And what are the top populations you're concerned about? And they all fall within the same mean as far as earthquakes and heat, but then there are communities that are concerned about active shootings, and there are other ones about violence, and there's others about terrorism, and then what's ever in the news that day, like a gas line might explode. And so what we have to do is not go into communities being prescriptive, saying, we're here to talk to you about heat waves. We're here to say, how can we make sure that no matter what happens in this neighborhood, all of you will survive, all of you will recover, and all of you will be here to celebrate your community's resilience afterwards. And that's when communities want to come to the table. The networks we set up, we tell them, you can use this network for anything. So we set a network up in one neighborhood for earthquakes, but then they activated for a domestic violence incident, right? So these networks are malleable, they're pliable, and that's what people want. Would you buy a cell phone that only dialed one phone number? Of course not, right? When we started Resilient Bayview, we were focused on earthquakes, but our first activation was for a heat wave. Now, it's true, we had 24 hours set up a cooling center. We learned our lesson, but I'd like to point out that just in the recent heat wave that we had a few months ago, 2 of our sites that we prepared with portable air conditioning systems to take care of their staff and clients activated, cared for the homeless, cared for seniors without any direction from the city, that they did it on their own, they were empowered, and those clients and staff had access to cooling resources without having to ask for permission. And we feel that's the future of climate change resilience, is empower people, give them the resources they deserve and need, and they will look to you as a partner moving forward, not as someone who didn't perform.
Wow. Well, I just want everyone to know, this is very rare. This is not the MO of every city. When I got invited here, and I said, well, I just want to make sure that we could try and make a connection between the story on the screen and the story on the street. I had no idea until Stephanie Rapp introduced me that this was the story. I mean, this is the hope. This is what we really hope will happen in lots and lots of other cities. I've just spent the last 2 weeks pretty much in Chicago on the 24th anniversary of this heat wave. We had our theatrical run at the Siskel, and each night we had a different group of people. And the other day, a newly elected woman of color to the Cook County Commission, she watched the movie and she said, well, a group of guys who are part of, Homeland Security here locally are all excited to have me come and see all the trucks because they get $26 million a year. They get $26 million a year for disaster preparedness training. So the question is, and that's just one county, right? You saw that. That's a lot of money. So what is that training? So if you could redefine disaster preparedness training the way you all are, which would mean then that, a community-based organization is the new brand of first responder. If you invest in that organization and their community center, then you're investing in their general operating so that they function really, really well and everyone gets a real living wage. And then that place becomes a cooling center because people want to go there because you're serving them for all the really important things, the shocks that happen every single day. That should become the norm. Like, we could use that $26 million in every county across the country in very radical, very realistic ways that would start to rebuild the infrastructure that we saw that has been totally decimated. Now, I don't know, that's where it comes in, like, someone's gonna say, Judith, you can't really do that, you have to rewrite the laws, it doesn't work that way. But I don't see why, and if you guys are a model, I don't see why your model can't serve other cities.
Well, what I can tell you is, especially as it comes to policy, is a lot of cities are not investing in community response to disaster. They're investing in larger infrastructures that does not even inform the community, and they don't come out until after the disaster, so there's no preparedness. I went to a meeting Friday and I said, when we stop submitting RFPs for 5 organizations to fight for $200,000 talking about preparedness, then we're gonna at least start the conversation. But when you have 20 people competing and fighting for disaster preparedness money to inform the community, but you say it's your priority, we have to change those policies. We have to be investing in community preparedness and not having those who wish to stand up fighting and writing grants to get the money to come prepare the residents of the city, that the residents of the community that the city is saying that they're preparing.
So we have just a few minutes left, so let's spend some time talking about ways that we can all take action. How do we support your work? How do we join this movement?
Well, I would just like to put out there, I mean, there's been information that's been shared up here regarding the city's official, like the website, SF72. It's a fantastic website. The Department of Emergency Management hosts and runs it. A lot of great information up there. But I want to get back to the core of what I was trying to touch on before. Communities that are disconnected, that don't invest every day in the small stuff, fail in the big stuff. And the truth is that, you know, our big program that we're running right now is called Neighbor Fest. It's called How to Throw the World's Best Block Party, right? And when we sat down and we looked at what were all the things we need people to do to come together, you know, during times of stress, be it a heat wave, be it an earthquake, it's always about coming together, creating a team, basically figuring out what resources you have, and helping each other get through the tough time. And what we realize is all the skills you need, you acquire by hosting a block party, right? So we have a program here in San Francisco called Neighbor Fest. We have 10 slots left for this fall. They're going to go quickly. Go neighborfest.org. And if you go to this website, when you sign up, not only do we help waive all the fees the city charges for hosting a block party, but you get this great toolkit, you get access to barricades, games, and toys, and all these other types of things. And then we'll actually come out that day and set up a table and help you asset map your block for the vulnerable residents. We'll also help you learn how to asset map your neighborhood for mission-critical resources you might need during times of stress: water, power, sewer, communications, all those types of things. And then we'll give you a personal preparedness toolkit to make sure that you're as ready as possible. And what's powerful about that is when people look up around them and they see all their neighbors standing around talking to each other, then they realize that's the real preparedness.
That's the asset.
That's their secret weapon, is each other. And Dr. Daniel Aldrich has proven quantitatively and qualitatively, based on Chicago, based on Tehuco, that your likelihood of surviving as a senior in a disaster is not regardless of the strength of your building or the size of the tsunami wall that was protect you. It is the immediate social cohesion you have with your neighbors to get you out of harm's way during times of stress. And I don't think that was any more powerfully elevated than the tragedy we saw in Fountain Grove, Santa Rosa, where people literally, because they didn't move quickly enough or didn't know their neighbors, burned to death in their homes, right, as a firestorm came over the hill, because they didn't know why their neighbors were knocking on their door in 3 in the morning, and they didn't trust them enough to take their advice. And so I just want to put out there that California, across the state right now, from the public safety power shutoff, from the heat waves, from the firestorms, from the smokes, and the inevitable earthquake, it'll always come down to one thing, and that is, does my neighbor know me? Do I trust my neighbor? And do they care about me enough to come and get me? So just do me a favor today or tonight or tomorrow when you wake up tomorrow morning and you see someone walking down the street, say hello. And then if you really want to go for it, go to neighborfest.org and throw a block party. You won't regret it.
Felicia, Bijan, anything you want to add in terms of action points?
I'm diddling what Daniel said. I'm also adding that, you know, in my community, one of my biggest desires now is to get out to speak to the young men who everyone is casting aside. They call them the hoodlums, the gangbangers, the loiterers who's at all the corner stores, and they're really not gangbanging. They just kind of don't have anything to do. There's nothing to do, and get them CPR certified and first aid trained, because they're on the block and they don't have a problem with going to their block, knocking on the doors. And if we train those individuals who are deemed to be part of the problem, we will make them the solution and give them something to do.
And just a parting request, if you have not signed up for city notifications, text your zip code to 888-777. When we see something coming, when we know there's information that we want to get to you or your loved ones, that's one of the primary ways that we'll communicate it to you, and that's when we then partner with the neighborhood groups to make sure that they are able to provide you with that immediate and real-time culturally competent assistance that you need.
I just want to add one thing. Really. Okay, I'll go for it.
Can I just add this, that we have a motto in Resilient Bayview, that Resilient Bayview is where the hotline meets the grapevine. Because the grapevine, you learn who did what to who within a matter of 5 minutes of them doing it, and that not everyone is technically savvy, have a cell phone, and everyone is registered. So you have to have a team that's on the ground who knows this, who's going to go out and look for those that have those barriers to communication. And where the hotline 311-411-911 meets the grapevine in the hood. Okay.
Amen. And I want to just, one thing I want to add to that is this, is that the videos you saw of the first responders practicing, I just want to be clear, just from my own personal piece, is that that's operational readiness, right? And I want to be very clear, like, if you saw how much money FEMA gets every year to help first responders achieve that level of readiness so they're going to be there when we really need them, because it is still tragically low. And I want to be very clear, like, if you look at the explosion in funding for our military in the last 3 or 4 years, it's hard to comprehend why we need all those battleships and airplanes when apparently everything's going great, right? And so I want to be very clear that I want our first responders to have the highest level of operational readiness, and we've seen when we don't invest in that on 9/11 and other occasions, that people do die, and often they are the first responders. So I want to just say that my position is federally funded. We just got a fantastic grant for the NeighborFest program to scale it. We're working very closely with FEMA Region 9. Bob Fenton is the director. He lives here in San Francisco. He's passionate about community resilience. FEMA is getting behind the neighbor-to-neighbor model, also the whole community approach. And I just want to put out there that if you really want to talk about mitigating the impact of climate change, you need to talk about, you know, the Department of Housing at the federal level. We need to start having HUD, having an honest conversation about how it's spending its money. We got to look at the community block champ programs. Let's put community block grants back in the community. Let the community spend it on what they want to spend it on. And if we don't all come together as soon as we need to, climate change is going to be the single biggest issue in our species' history. And the reality is, it's being divided up on party lines right now. But when you go into the neighborhoods that are being experienced it, they don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. You lost your loved one, you lost your home, you're losing everything. That, I think, in the long term is why I'm passionate about NeighborFest, because when it comes down to the reality, it's at the block level, and they don't care about Washington, D.C. And that's why I want to encourage people to take this conversation back to their neighborhood, back to their block, and talk to their neighbors. And don't start with the White House. Start with my house, and your house, and our children.
Thank you so, so much to all of you for your knowledge, for your passion, for your expertise, for your commitment, and especially to you, Judith, for this incredible film.
Bravo.
Thank you,
And thanks to you for coming.